So yeah, we have a lot to talk about. I want to cover agaves. I want to cover Mexican whiskey, if we can. I want to talk about non-alc collaborations with race car drivers. But let's start by really getting into your wheelhouse and talking a little bit about botany and plant biology. Talk to me about the agave in the most simplest form. What is it that makes this plant so special?
So agave is a lily, is a monocot plant, so it's within the world of plants that flowers, and it's split in two, monocots and dicots, and this is a monocot. So the growth pattern is similar to grass, to palm trees, to artichokes, to it's like concentric, and from there you will have this. But what is special about agave is that in his natural history, has spent a great amount of its evolutionary process in drought. So it's the most water efficient plant on earth, as it's known in the world, which means if you have a restricted amount of water available to water a plant, the one will provide you with more sugar than any other is actually the agave plant. So it's an incredibly interesting and important plant on that side. Also, it's a plant during their 10 million years of evolution that has populated very successfully a large extension of the earth, which is from the south of the United States up to the equator. More in the certain species in the Caribbean islands, and of course most of them are represented in Mexico. But because its adaptability and the globalization that occurred 500 years ago when the Spaniards discovered America trying to go to Asia, just like grapes, agave was taken from Mexico and distributed along the entire world. So it's a very well distributed plant, successful in any drought environment. It will require water, at least for a few times along the year, but after that we'll manage it incredibly well to stay alive and be productive.
And how does the physicality of the plant itself, the pencas, the central structure of it, the root system, play into that water, the economy of its water usage?
Absolutely. The morphology of the agave is incredibly well-designed organisms for that purpose. So first of all, it has particular developed tissues, parenchyma, which is like a bunch of cells that are very, very big and are able to absorb and keep a lot of water. It's a plant as well with a really intense fat metabolism. It produces a lot of fat with the goal of protecting itself from water loss. So in the surface, for instance, because it's not only in the surface, it's all around the plant, but in the surface, it has this thick layer of wax which make it to look like bluish or grayish. It scatters the light in a way that that's why you have this weird like reflection when you see a blue agave. It's not like the bright green you will typically see. And all these adaptations are helping them. And the roots are a really amazing system. You know, when after drought, when the first rain comes, in just 15 minutes, the roots can get elongated over 20 centimeters more to absorb the water as fast as possible. And the entire shape of it, the concave lids, are designed to grab as much water as it falls and send it to the center. And then the root system, which is very superficial, and that again it activates really fast after drought when a little bit of rain comes down, and the roots start to grow really fast. That's why, for example, when you're gonna do a new plantation of agave, you take the Hijuelos, which are these new tiny plants that are developed from the rhizomes, and you stress them. You put it out there in the air to dry. So all that stress will allow that when you plant them and the first rain comes down, the roots get established really fast in a really good way.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the pencas of the agave, I think it's very easy just to view them as protective, spiky, to avoid off predators. But actually, those are guttering for rainwater, right? Every single one of them is channeling rainwater into that central structure of the plant.
Yeah, so it's trying to defend the center of the plant, which is where the meristem, the tissues that are able to produce new tissues, either at the top where the leaves are being generated or the roots are protected, and And well, in that epicenter is where the maximum amount of water and sugars are stored, right? It's like yeah, and it's trying again, as you clearly say it right. It has a lot of different solutions to try to avoid predators of all kind of sizes, so microscopic to macroscopic, to mammals and other kind of things. We can discuss that because that's what builds the flavor in agave. A lot of those substances are out there for a different purpose, which is not really to make us happy.
Chemicals to ward off predators end up creating flavor within the resulting agave spirit. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So in my career, I started studying agave biochemistry and physiology. I did my PhD actually here in England, strangely. I mean, it's not
Welcome back.
kind of, well, thank you. I mean, I come back often, but yeah. But I had them in greenhouses in the University of Sussex. I arrived there. I came very stimulated by a bunch of academics and faculty that when I arrived, they just left because some Middle Western university paid them lots of money to move from Brighton into Idaho or Iowa. I have no idea. So I was a little bit disappointed. The good thing, there was lots of space in the greenhouses, and I brought them and I studied them for 5 years. Now the grandchildren of those plants, maybe the grandchildren of those lives in the Eden project.
Oh yes, I live near.
There's a blue agave little space. Those plants
I know them.
came directly from my scientific project.
No way. I live 20 minutes from the Eden project, so I go there quite a lot.
Okay, there you go. So I used to be the
You're the grandfather of the plants that are there. Yeah. It's funny. I have some agaves in my greenhouse at home. Actually, only little ones. I bought them as Hijuelos a year ago. Four different varieties or species. In fact, let's talk about that. How many different species of agave are there?
So it's complex and polemic. First, because the lifespan of these plants is really long, and sometimes if you ask the traditional biologists that will measure and calculate and try to identify the differences, will tell you this is a species, this is not. The ultimate proof of something being a species is to be able to inbreed one with another that you believe is not the same species but is close by, having an F0, so the first generation, and then having a second one, which is sexually, it's like you can have a mule, but a mule is really the blend of two different species and is incapable of having offspring. That is incredibly complex to do. So what are the tools available? Well, genetic distance, for instance. And what you do, you take populations of things that you believe is the same, look the same, and you try to identify if there's difference. When you do that, then you discover a lot of things we believe are different species they may not be. For example, agave tovala and cupreata, I mean, there's papers proving that the genetic distance of populations in, for instance, Michoacán and Guerrero, and tobalas from Oaxaca, when you really look at their genes, there's more similitude between some tobalas and cupreatas than for different group of families of cupreatas from different areas. So it's a big obsession by the bartenders, sometimes the biologists as well, to try to name things. But it's like blue agave. Blue agave is not a real species. This has been proven before. Of course, no tequilero will like to accept that
It's
blue
a variety
agave
within.
is just a variety of an espadín.
Yeah.
But it's actually an espadín, guys. I'm very sorry to say it.
Yeah.
Of course, they always claim a particular variety of all, the blue Weber, but it's hard to distinguish, in other words. But let's come to the question. There may be around 120, 150 species from which, in average, each species may have 5 to 6 different varietals. So agaves represents the largest source of biodiversity of any kind of plants being used for alcohol. Because if you're thinking what's the next is grape, and it's only one species with a few varieties. They use different names around the world of the same ones. But here, when you are talking about agave spirits, you are truly talking about the most diverse category that exists in order to make spirits.
Yeah, and then on the variety level, it gets really confusing as well, because as you travel around Mexico and see, especially some of the more traditional producers of raicilla and of mezcal, oftentimes local variety names are used that sound like they are unique, but in actual fact, it's just a name for it that they use there, or it's a name for the plant growing in a specific place, altitude, slope.
Completely. They use, for example, a lot of physical characteristics, largo, chato, or color, green, agave verde, you know? So
it's confusing and complex. And yeah, so I think on the whole, the rule is that there's probably less species and less varieties than people think there are. Is that correct?
That could be, because there's another thing. Agaves are have an incredible capacity of adapting themselves. In biology, that concept is called plasticity, which means the way they express their genetic resources will depend on the conditions they grow. So terroir is probably much more important than getting obsessed on the species you are talking about. I mean, if you have similar species and not so similar growing in the same piece of land, you could have a much more similar mezcal, for instance, than just because it's a different species.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's a factor, but terroir is an enormous factor. I mean, and the fact that these plants live for this long is like having a long exposure photograph that lasts 10, 12 years, and then you can reveal that into a spirit, and you have a particular picture.
You develop it into the picture.
And yeah, you probably have a different type of camera, and maybe the colors are a little bit changed. It's more in the orange or in the bluish or whatever, depending on the species you choose. But they may be taking a similar photograph of the conditions in which they are growing and living.
Let's talk about reproduction. How do agaves reproduce?
So agave's reproduction it can be sexual or asexual, but depends on the species. There are species with both abilities. So the rhizomes can become new plants, like happens in blue agave and espadín. And those, for obvious reasons, has been the ones that historically has been reproduced by the communities that distill this kind of products. But as is known since quite some time, although being denied, or let's say with no commitment, many brands who started to establish themselves since the 90s, trying to oversell the wild thing, which is irresponsible. If you want to make brands to cross borders and be sold here and there, you must have an agronomical project. If not, you are fucking up. Honestly,
yeah, I definitely want to get into that. Maybe let's table that and talk about it later about agaves.
Yeah. But to your point, is from seeds is reproduction as well, and it's not such a complicated thing to go and harvest some seeds. So basically, when the quiote is formed and the flowers become
the quiote is the flower stalk that comes up when the plant reaches full sexual maturity, and that varies when it happens depending on the species of agave
and the conditions.
Yes,
quite a lot. Like if you are in a colder, higher altitude, colder weather, it tends to take longer. If you are in a more like with more humidity and warmer, this may happen earlier. So also the time of maturity is a very ample thing. It's not so precise. But yeah, so and then these seeds can be grown. I mean, in nature they will just spread all around, and if it's lucky enough, for example, tobala can exclusively be reproduced by seed. And in nature, some of these seeds will have to fall in the shadow of an oak tree. Typically, we'll see a connection between wild tobala and oak trees. And that shadow will allow the conditions for that tiny little seed, it's super small, to then become something, to become a plant that eventually will be able to grow. And Oaxacan traditional tobalas, like wild tobalas, will typically be in oak forests. For example, in our experience, I have a brand called Montelobos. What we do is we grow them in greenhouses, and once they reach certain size, after a year of taking care of this tiny little seed that became a plant, we plant them in the open in Puebla. the tobalas you get are absolutely different because there's no shadow, so the plant overexpressed fat and is a much more higher concentration of terpenes, for example. Terpenes are these things you enjoy in a gin, which are these green elements,
like
green tea,
piney,
piney, yeah. Some of the species of agave are very rich in those, or they are so poor in sugars that you need a lot of kilos, so you end up trapping a lot of those. I mean, depends, but yeah, and then the tobala can survive in the open. The shadow is not necessarily anymore because it has in its biology the ability to manage that. But again, this terroir effect and this ability can make you very different raw materials depending on the conditions.
In case you haven't heard, this is going to be the summer of the Paloma. It's a fantastic long tequila drink, the bedfellow of the margarita, citrusy, fresh, and incredible vibrant pink color. If you're going to make this drink, then you're going to need this from my sponsor, Fever Tree, their pink grapefruit soda. Made with fresh, ruby red grapefruits, it adds that wonderful sweet, sour, and slightly bitter tang to a nice Paloma. Take yourself a highball glass, fill it up with plenty of ice, add a splosh of your favorite tequila, and then top up with Fever Tree's pink grapefruit soda. Finally, and most importantly, finish with a slice of pink grapefruit. Now, let's get back to the show. Let's just focus quickly on the sort of genetics here. The difference between agave that's pollinated or the seed is formed versus a hijuelo, where it's a pup. It's basically an offspring coming out of the plant itself. There's a distinct difference here, right?
Yeah, so the genetic diversity generated through sexual reproduction is the optimal. I mean, you have the opportunity to cross two sets of genetic information and rearrange it through the generation of seeds. So you will have each seed will be different and will have integrated the genomes of two organisms. So in that sense, that brings the opportunity to have multiple expressions of genetics, which in case of a selective force comes, it's an incredible strong drought or some pest arrives, you have different forms of biology within the population that will be able to tolerate better. What you do it with Hijuelos, it's not exactly the case. Although I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my research during my PhD. It's not that it's identical to the mother, and it's very interesting stuff in agave plants, but it's very, very similar. So as there's no genetic opportunity there to enrich its diversity, what agave's mechanism does is there's some kind of ancient virus within the genes of agave called that comes from retrotransposons. It's called retrotransposon that comes from retroviruses.
Okay.
They call retrotransposons. Transposons basically are sections that can insert themselves and multiply within the gene. So
it's a virus that
it's an ancient virus that lives in your gene. So it's like information that says read me, copy me, and reinsert me.
Sure.
So retrotransposons, very abundant in plants, and there's also presence in animals, but in agave, the activity of retrotransposons is incredibly crazy. And this explains a lot of the incredible failure of tissue culture strategies that some companies have had with terrible results, but I can tell you in a moment. So what happened is when hijuelos are formed, there are genetic insertions randomly created. This is not driven, and those hijuelos will have some sort of diversity. It's not as good, not even close as good. It's like a way of mutating, if you want, through a process that will just generate some randomly movements in the DNA trying to repair. Agaves are also have a really high copy of chromosomes, very, very large, 16, 24, 36 copies of the same chromosome. So it's a very complex DNA too. So, but let's say that's the only way through an asexual reproduction, this kind of
so do you think this high sort of
generate
high retrovirus activity is a sort of evolutionary trait that's brought about by it being a potentially asexual reproducer? Like it's necessarily built in so that you get some genetic diversity.
So it happened, inside ourselves, we have genes from being a flatworm, and we have genes from fish, and we evolved through a long process. But retroviruses got inserted and become part of our DNA, or we also have them, but we normally don't have such a intense kind of activity. In plants, they use this strategy to make modifications, random modifications. So in tissue culture, companies wanted to make the most productive plantations possible. So what they did is they choose the most beautiful blue agave, took them, put it with hormones, cut the center, the meristems, that's tissue where either the roots or the leaves are formed, and then you add hormones that de-differentiate those cells, so then they are totipotentiary. Basically, you can create any tissue out of it. And you put it in a solution and eventually in an agar plate, and from a tiny little piece of those cells, you can create a new plant. So you can make thousands and thousands of plants from a single plant using hormones. The problem is that those hormones exacerbate the expression of the retrotransposomes activity. And if you start to use your tissue culture, because those cells you just pull from the callus, that's this kind of like a tumor you generate, like this bunch of cells, you pull them to make more plants. If that is taken for a little bit too long, then you start to get very weird
mutations.
Agaves without, for example, spikes, or with weird colors, or because a lot of mutation starts to happen. Okay. So there's been programs in which they have invested enormous amount of money, mostly at the beginning of the technology of tissue culture, that failed completely. They thought they were choosing for a very rich in sugar thing, but through the tissue culture thing, they were fucking up the genes in a very crazy manner. So a lot of that wasn't successful at the end.
So why is this sort of exploration of tissue culture happening? Is it not enough just to take Hijuelos from the best performing agaves and then propagate with those?
Look, as you know, the world of agave is very speculative, and you have times in which things are more expensive or not. But also, you sometimes have plantations that are incredibly productive and rich in sugar, and then you sometimes don't. So, wouldn't be amazing, and this is large companies like Sausa and Cuervo and the big ones, to have a very homogenized raw material that is always very sweet, that is always at the top. So the idea of tissue culture came from there.
Just marginal gains in efficiency.
And then you don't have to buy the hijuelos. You can produce as many you want, and you know exactly where this is coming from. So now what they've done is to reduce the timeline of the tissue culture. So if you make a tissue culture, you may use it very briefly, and then you have to create a new one, because you get the accumulation of these crazy retrotransposons jumping here and there, and seems to be affecting. So if you have a really short use of that callus, things may work. Actually, Los Danzantes made a project with large agaves like a Roqueño that may take 15 years to mature, and they were putting a lot of care in having a short period of that callus in order to produce more agaves. This technique is useful for really long lifespan agaves, I would say, but carefully, because you may not get what you expect.
How do you get from cells in a petri dish to an actual plant? What's the sort of process?
So you have sets of hormones that you add, and it will induce the formation of either to de-differentiate or the formation of roots and leaves. It's like the cells gets into a different stage, and they just start to be transformed into a plant. But you do that by adding gibberellins and other, I should remember them, but I don't remember them by heart.
But it's all the hormones that would normally be there present in a young plant to make it grow.
Those hormones lives in plants, but they are, of course, but you can produce them artificially outside and then apply it to the agaves and to the agave cells. And
so as you mentioned, there's often claims sort of aimed at tequila for sort of homogenization. Whatever there are 600 million agave plants in Jalisco, all blue agaves, all it's stated, clones of one another, and the sort of risk that brings about for a specifically evolved predator or disease, fungi, whatever it might be. How worried are you about that, given that you've just said that actually they're not all exactly clones, they're just pretty damn similar?
No, they are incredibly. I mean, when you get a big picture compared to most of cultivated plants, or the level of similarity in this monoculture is really, really big. I'm just saying it's not mathematically identical. Many people would say they are identical. Well, biology is not exactly like that. I'm just trying to say there are some things, but they are very, very similar, and that's a problem. Disease starts to spread, and the speed in which it can jump from one place to another is huge. And in moments like this one, where the prices are really depressed, where a lot of producers, they know they will not make money out of their plantations, they just abandon them, and that becomes an incredibly detrimental circumstances for the neighboring plantations that maybe who is growing it has the capacity to transform that into tequila because they invested, but they have a tequila production factory, or because they have already some agreements. That becomes an issue because the spread of the illness will start to jump into the other
because you have
too.
agaves effectively decaying in the field, and that's sort of fertile ground for diseases.
Absolutely. And the other thing is the technological package associated with blue agave. Very sadly, for the last 35 years, has diminished the asking for the plant to defend itself. So we've been getting weaker and weaker and weaker agaves because we never allows the natural selection to give us the ones that are more tolerant, because we adopted this monocultive concept in which you are constantly adding not only fertilizers but also other anti-fungi and pest control substances without allowing the plant. So yes, we probably have selected relatively productive and fast cycle blue agaves, but very weak as well.
Yeah.
And very polluting, creating a very polluting process. But that can change. I mean, Casa Lumbre has its own agronomical project since, we started in 2017, 18. We first started with the Lopez family in Oaxaca. We have an organic program so far. Montelobos is fully organic in the Espadín side. And then we started in Puebla. And now we grow many different species. We're starting in Jalisco very recently to start to get into blue agave. And actually, there's companies who pay us to grow their agave. And we do use a lot of drones. There's a lot of ways you can minimize the input. Like if you do aerial photographs and you use infrared, you can really understand what's the requirement if you need to add extra nutrient. And here I'm talking about like standard agriculture, let's say, not organic. But you can do it plant by plant or in spots. You don't have to come here and waste. It's a much more efficient, costly as well, but you also impact much less the agriculture. Growing papayas or growing citrus, tomato, those are wonderful crops to grow next to...
You see a lot more lime trees growing amongst agaves now in the fields. I noticed when I was in Mexico last time, and it's good for the soil, right? The soil health, and good for the sort of sustainability and longevity of the plant, and it's the environment it's growing in.
Completely. And also you can make really, I mean, this can be a wonderful thing for the communities you are working with, the farmers, which normally they get paid. Let's say in the deals we do, normally we have a 50-50 deal. Let's say I will put all the resources, you will work here, and at the end, half of the agave is yours, half is ours, and we can ask you to buy. I mean, we could buy it. But what if you make that piece of land also available for producing other secondary things that enriched their pockets and that protects the agave itself? Because if there's citrus or there's papaya trees, they will take care, they will clean it. There's other reasons to maintain the the plantation in a better shape. So yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done, and exploring the capacities of the agave itself to manage the challenges in the field. That's something. I mean, the blue agave industry has standardized with lots of chemicals, like for example, herbicides that are banned, like glyphosate in Europe, is still used in Mexico in large amounts, and it's not really necessary. It's just the easy go-to option because there's ignorance and there's not a real strategy to change things. So I think people are waking up. The tequileros are waking up. Still, it's hard because, again, you probably try to do that, but your neighbor is not doing it. So at the end, you are having all these troubles, no? Like the picudo, right? You have these, the pheromones traps. That sounds like great, but actually those traps attract the picudo.
Yeah.
But you can bring picudo into your...
Yeah.
So okay, you can
welcoming them in. Yeah.
You can put that in your field, but if the other fields are doing nothing, then the traps, instead of being something useful, becomes a very, very big problem.
You're the magnet for it.
Exactly.
Yeah. What efforts are there in place to try and build more genetic diversity amongst blue agaves?
Well, not much that I know. I mean, the common ones is some producers are trying to allow the sun blue portion of their fields to produce flowers. With a lot was in relationship with bats, which yes, bats feeds from the agave. There are very few that are exclusivistics that only use agave, but let's say agave doesn't need that much the bats as the bats need the agave.
Yeah.
Agaves can be pollinated by multiple organisms. I mean, marketing-wise is wonderful, I think, and I think the bats are very important. But just to clarify and demystify this, it's not like without bats there's no agaves. No, it's not like that.
Yeah.
But that's one way, and then recovering those seeds and trying to put greenhouses and develop that. The rate success of sprouting of the blue agave seeds is worse than in any other, because this again has not been allowed to have sexual reproduction. But still, you can get 40%, 35%.
And is it right that a lot of blue agaves don't even produce a quiote and flower?
That's right.
And that again is
is this false idea of the male and female agave, which is totally wrong. I mean, there's no the agave plant has sexual organs. Yes, like in the quiote, you will have the flowers that receive pollen, and then you have also pollen that can be around and can be taken to another plants. But it's not male and female agave.
Yeah,
it's only agaves that are impaired to produce a quiote.
Yeah, and this is something that I encountered when touring around distilleries, that some tequileros refer to the agaves when they arrive as piñas as male or female, and it's to do with whether or not it's basically the root of the quiote is present within the piña. Is that correct? That I know this is incorrect. I'm just going with what they say. And this bit needs chopping out because it creates bitterness, and they describe that as a male, and one without this this sort of anatomical component as a female. But really all it is one of these plants has produced a quiote, has reached sort of sexual maturity, and the other one is not capable of doing that.
It's two options. They either harvested before that moment arrived, you will never know. Yeah. Or, in fact, it was reaching almost maturity, but was incapable of producing, which is also the opposite.
Well, how would you, if you had to take a guess, what percentage of blue agaves do you think are capable of producing a quiote?
I think like 60%, 70%. I mean, most of them.
Yeah.
And again, whatever you see is maybe the quiote was coming, but the decision in the mezcal world, you see the harvesting is more plant by plant decision. In the blue agave world, the standardization of harvesting is typically you will go and cut the entire field. So that's why I think it's hard, and it's a lot of this mysticism or this storytelling, which bartenders loves and producers loves as well to tell, which is based in certain reality. But yeah, many times mature, they have reached a good amount of sugar, and they are just being harvested prior to find out if there's going to be a Quiote or not. You know, because most of the harvesting in agave world, in blue agave world, is done by the entire parcel. It's not like they go plant by plant.
Yeah, sure. They're not walking around one plant to harvest another one.
Exactly.
Which is like a lot of that still goes on in mezcal, I suppose, and raicilla and so on. And maybe we'll get to the difference there shortly. Terroir. Let's talk a little bit about that for a second. You've already emphasized how it perhaps can be even more important than the species of the agave, though it still feels like it's not necessarily universally agreed that it's a significant part of agave spirits. Some producers I've met believe that the terroir is more actually appropriate to where the distillery is, its altitude, the natural yeasts that are around, all that sort of thing, as opposed to where the agave plant itself was grown. Whereas other producers emphasize terroir quite heavily and believe, everything from whether the slope is facing south or north, the soil type, all of that sort of stuff is actually really intrinsic to the end product. What's your take on it?
So yeah, first of all, how the raw material, the agave plant is processed, will have an enormous impact. So terroir becomes relevant when that part is fixed, when that part is very clear, and then you can bring different phases of what that process will bring. Because yes, the length of fermentation, if you like to ferment for very long, that will produce, first you will have a lot of bacteria growing there, or the yeast. Look, 80% of the tequileros likes to say they have their own isolated yeast. When you go, I mean, I'm good friends with people in the technical universities and institutions that research these things. Most of those yeasts is not the one who is actually fermenting agave. They add it, they believe it's working there, but it's some other one that wins the race once the fermentation started, that is better adapted to the distillery than the yeast they actually.
And that would be a yeast that's already sitting there on the inside of the fermenters, or it's sort of hanging around.
All around.
Yeah.
All around. And that, of course, will have an impact.
Which is interesting because you have a distillery that's emphasizing the yeast that they have propagated and believe that is doing all the hard work, but actually it's something even more personal to the distillery that is really making the alcohol.
Completely. And then also there's not the fermentation is not a linear kind of process. You will have other organisms there
kick in at different times.
And most of, if not all, the fermentation in the agave world is in open vats, and you will have bacteria. For example, hydrolysis, or the breaking down of sugars, is not always complete. You have lactic bacteria that likes to utilize, like lactobacillus, those type of sugars that yeast typically cannot use. So it's more complex than that. So will depend. In those distilleries that they have a really strong yeast propagation and they really load the thing with yeast, you can trust that most probably is that yeast the one winning the race. But where they add a little bit, or that they are passing from previous batches to the next one, eventually the most adapted one will be the one really successfully growing there. And it's not necessarily the one they inoculated 15 days ago in starting the operation of the distillery. So yeah, I mean, just getting back to terroir then, we've just talked about fermentation being one part of it, and obviously there are various other parts of production, how you choose to cook the agaves, completely,
the milling and distillation and cuts and all that sort of thing. So where does this leave us with terroir? It leaves us, in my opinion, in a strange situation where we can say that terroir matters, but also there's so many other things that matter. Its effect or its impact is somewhat diminished.
I think it's an ingredient. Look, when many years ago in this same place we are speaking, Café Pacifico, I'm talking here 2010, I came with Thomas Estes. He was, let's say, inaugurating almost his brand, Tequila Ocho, and I got fascinated. I mean, as a biologist, finally someone who, in a very intuitive, not very scientific, because he wasn't that scientific minded, but he was basically keeping a process the same, but playing with different ranches.
I think
Then that
Carlos
approach-
Camarena has some background in.
He's more of a nerd, and he's an engineer.
Yeah, more than Thomas, but he has some background in plant biology or agriculture or something. I think.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I mean, I know him and respect him very much, but really, who was for me a fundamental person in my career and I had close to me was for sure Thomas.
Yeah.
So I can tell more about that. But Thomas really did that exploration and help us to get amazed and prove how strong the terroir can be with, of course, Carlos, right? Which was, okay, I'm going to keep the process the same and I will bring agaves from different regions. And then you were able to discover that. And I think, but unless you have that opportunity, it will be very hard to identify where things are coming from.
Yeah, where terroir sort of hands over to production, right?
I'm gonna, for example, this tequila here called the Frente.
Shall we try it, by the way? We should
We
probably
can
stop
try it,
drinking
yes.
some because
We are changing a little bit. I mean, this is a 35%, but we are moving to 40. This is gonna be out of the equation soon.
This is 35%. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so it's the Mexican strength.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we are moving everything to 40 now, as we are going to be launching in the U.S. soon. This is a tequila made with 3 processes in the same place, same agave, but it really makes a difference. So in the tequila world, typically the master distiller will find this traditional way of making tequila, and every producer will decide its process, and typically they keep it the same. The innovation comes more in the proof, in the cuts of the distillation, if they're gonna rest it in wood for how long. But my passion has been white spirits and what agave can bring to you. So this product is a blend of 3 different tequilas. There's tequila that shows something that others can't. So, for example, if you undercooked agave, let's say you leave it at 85, 87% of hydrolysis, you will have a very little caramelization. But what you're going to keep is an enormous amount of green, fresh aromas.
85, 87%, that's the quantity of water. What is that?
No, it means that from the 100% sugar that is in your must or in the, let's say, in the agave, because that you will have to use a process for cooking it. Let's say you put it in a brick oven, as happens with this product. And if you do a deep cooking, you will hydrolyze, you will break down the chains of fructose called fructans in agave. So it will become sweet, but also the heat and the acidity will generate caramel. It would create reactions called Maillard reactions that are a source of an enormous number of different tasty and aromatic compounds.
Toasty,
right?
like
But
roasted.
the problem is, inevitably, you will lose the terpenic green dimension. You can try to design something in the middle that has some of the caramelic and some of the herbaceous, so you don't get so obsessed with the cooking, so you got in the middle point. But there's no other way. You either keep your cooking in a more, let's say, less intense way to allow the greens to happen, or you go all the way, like, I don't know, there's certain profiles. Tapatio is super caramelic, for example, right? I mean, depending on the style. And so how I was really upset about, but what if I want everything? And then texture. So Taona brings a lot of fat into the equation. And fat is amazing because it traps the pungency of the alcohol and encapsulate it. And
Some things are only fat soluble, right? So they kind of stick around.
that's also true. But very importantly, is pungency is one of the things that gets improved if you want. So here we have undercooked and really well cooked 2 tequilas, and then a third one that is Taona meal in order and also fermented with the fiber. So when you blend that, you get a very complete
Interesting.
tequila. And it's interesting. Look, I come from the academia, as you know, and I love this kind of experiments. And many times innovation in tequila is limited because people is very traditionalist, which is nothing necessarily wrong. But there's so much you can do sometimes in processes that typically are untouched.
Yes.
One is the cooking, and the fermentation is also very much untouched in most distilleries. They don't move that. Then is everything else. Everything happening in the stills, that's pretty much touched. And of course, when they age, that's pretty much touched.
You talked about sort of with the undercooked trying to mitigate or maybe minimize the Maillard reactions there from the sort of longer roasting process. One way that it strikes me you could do that is effectively just boiling the agave, so you don't get any air exposure. It's just water. You wouldn't go above 100 degrees Celsius. You could completely cook the plant, but not have any of that roasted layer to it, and produce a tequila that way. Has anyone done that?
It will get inefficient. Unfortunately, there will be a certain amount of sugars that will not be broken down. If you want to not caramelize that much, you will have a lower yield, but you will have a very fresh green tequila.
Okay. I got you.
In the other way, you will have a much more yield, but will be much more caramelic. So I think that's fascinating. And the terpenic dimension of agave is something I love. So coming back to process, yes, you have a Karwinski. Why Karwinski is so green? First, because it has high concentrations of terpenes, but also because you need a lot of kilos in order to make so very little sugar, which means immediately you will have a higher ratio of herbal versus sweet. The same happens when you look at the terroir of the agaves growing in the highlands and the valley. In the valley, you have faster cycles of agave. You typically are smaller agaves with less sugar, and basically you are incorporating more raw material because you have per kilo of sugar. So you are having a ratio of more fiber than sugar, which increases the green notes there.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
While in the Altos area, or
even if you're not fermenting with fiber, it would still increase the green notes, even if you're milling out the fiber.
Well, of course, if you are using a diffuser or if you are, I mean, that's going to get affected. I'm just imagine you're keeping the same process and you're processing different agave. So these ratios are very, very relevant. And many people believe everything is in the plant. No, it's also the amount you use, the amount of sugar you have to obtain this kind of.
This is I think both the incredibly exciting thing, and bear in mind we've only really talked about blue agave so far. It's the exciting thing about tequila and agave spirits, but it's also in a way it's the disappointing thing, because there are so many different variables to this. Everything from the field, the species, the way in which it's been grown, the conditions, the altitude, the time in which it's harvested, all the way through to cooking and milling, and all the different ways that can be done, and then fermentation and yeast cultures, through to distillation and how that's done, and then whether or not it goes into a barrel and what strength it's bottled at. There are so many variables here, and it's so much fun to talk about just one of those variables, but then you realize it's just one, and all the effects that we imagine that this can have will eventually be diluted out by all the other variables that can play.
But look, there's many ways. If you are able to fix them, doesn't matter what they are, in a certain way, then you can play with that variable.
How easy are those to fix, though, do you think? Like, bear in mind we have seasonal variations.
The distilleries at some point reach certain basal status, let's say. Well, depends, of course. If you have seasonal productions in tiny little distilleries next to a river where they produce only certain, that's different. But if you're talking about an operation that is more or less established, things get quite, even fermentation gets very
standardized.
Yeah, I think there's a typical profile that will be obtained there, and then you can play with those variables. Like here, in the case of the Frente, this blend, I'm playing with the variable of cooking mostly and a little bit of the milling, trying to build a particular sensorial experience that will be very ample, from the caramelic to the herbal and the right texture, right? So I'm playing with those variables. That's possible. The rest, I could tell you, is more standardized to the distillery is happening there, right? So I don't know. I think the rationalization, to become aware of what's going on in the distillery. Yeah, it's beautiful, the story behind that, but I think it's important if we want to create new propositions is to play with those variables. Keep things as they are, but explore what happens if I do this. What happens if I keep I don't know, I do a 15 days fermentation. Things are going to get funky. Things are going to go into more like rum, you know, like these
Esters, weird.
Esters
Yeah.
to the... But people are, I mean, people, my beloved tequileros are not that creative. And it's been very little cross-hybridization between mezcal and tequila. That's the other thing that is really crazy. It's been very little. I mean, some people had done it, but there's very few distilleries who they've been more focusing, oh yeah, the roasting pit. Let's go back to the roasting pit and make tequila. Okay, that's just one thing, but what about fermentation? And what about like long time fermentation? The sizes of the vessels we ferment is not the same. The transfer of heat, the surface. I mean, normally mezcal fermentations are in lower temperature than tequila because the volume is in a smaller container of wood. Wood is a permeable thing. You get by conductivity, water gets within the fibers of the wood and it's evaporating in the outside. It's like when you take a shower and you go out, you feel cold because molecules of water are leaving your body and it's cooling down. So the temperature in fermentation of mezcal is very much less hot than in tequila.
Yeah.
But everybody is fermenting the same way. Very little people is controlling the temperature of fermentation. I mean, bricks. Everybody in the tequila world is fermenting between 12 to 9 bricks. It's true, you cannot go above because
This is
it's toxic.
sugar content of the mosto.
Of the mosto.
Yeah.
You cannot go higher because it's toxic. Agave is so bloody toxic to the yeast that if you want to have more sugar, you will have to concentrate that, but you will also concentrate all the inhibitors of the yeast. In grapes, you go to 24 bricks. In agave, you can't.
So,
But if you low down the temperature, if you ferment at lower temperature, the toxicity of the agave gets reduced as well. But people is not playing.
so you
with
go
those variables.
higher bricks, lower temperature, and it
Then you can
sustain it.
ferment.
Interesting.
And then energetically, it may be costly to cool down the fermentation, but you're going to save a lot of energy when you distill. You know why? You will get double the alcohol.
Yeah, sure.
So you will have less water to evaporate.
Get rid of.
The thing is, again, the traditionalistic view, and look, I've been criticized enormously, and at the same time, some people has valued my contribution in the industry. I mean, I don't complain. I think in terms of the theory or the science behind these people feels very happy about what I share. But in terms of these breaking the rule things, not everybody. It's starting for making a mezcal. I mean, in 2011, I decided to make a mezcal that I wanted to make, and that was, not everybody was happy because this idea that me being from Jalisco, what I'm doing making mezcal, right? And my father was not making tequila neither. I mean, I am a plant scientist.
Yeah.
Right? But I think those explorations are valuable. I think we have to invite more people to go deeper into moving and playing with those variables you were mentioning.
So, not to put you on the spot, and this is probably a question you're not going to want to answer, but if you had to select one variable in the production of tequila that is the most impactful, what do you think it would be?
Wow. I think the raw material. I mean, as I'm talking the triangle of the species you choose. We are talking agave world, let's say.
Okay, so
What
we're
agave-
not just talking tequila, you're talking mezcal as
Yeah,
well.
okay.
right.
If you want me to talk tequila,
And let's move on to mezcal in a minute. Maybe we'll start the mezcal chat with the same question. So, in tequila, what do you think the most important factor is in production?
it's very difficult. But one that I have discovered is dramatic is roasting, is cooking, because this is what I explained. And just after that, it's difficult to...
Yeah, sure.
They are close by.
Sure. I thought you were going to say fermentation.
Fermentation
Yeah.
is the immediate other.
Yeah.
But also, you can ferment any way you want, but if you don't allow a nice cut, you will not get a lot of the stuff that is created in a long fermentation. Long fermentation, we create lactic, malolactic,
Yeah.
an acetic fermentation to occur. So what happened in the heads, you will have all these nail polish, white gas, like solvent-like kind of notes, and in the tails you will get these funky, cheesy, acidic kind of products, byproducts that fermentation is generating. So even though you may ferment for long, if you cut too much, you will not get much of that. So also
The distillation is a.
but I would say cooking, then fermentation, then cuts.
Yeah,
would
sure.
be-
Okay, great. Let's draw a line on tequila because we need to move on. But that's
Okay.
fascinating. So, segueing into mezcal, with what we've talked about and the monoculture of blue agave and the seeming sort of dominance of espadin in mezcal, do you kind of foresee mezcal making the same kind of mistakes that tequila did in terms of a single agave species or variety?
Yes and no, and I'm gonna explain why. First, still mezcal has a much more larger area for growing and producing.
The biggest DO in the world, right?
Yeah, because our DOs has no sense. Instead of having a product definition and then multiple DOs, Mexico got crazy and has bastardized kind of the conception of what denomination of origins are. I mean, there's the connection between the definition of the product is linked to a denomination, which is crazy. I mean, it's wrong. In wine, you have wine, and they have a wine from different places. And you have to accomplish certain technicalities in order to be wine and to be respectful to what that product definition is. And then you can have different styles and rules for that.
So do you think there should be separate DOs for, say, Oaxaca mezcal?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That would have sense. If not, the DO has no sense. It's a product definition that you use the relationship to place just to restrict others, not to compete with you, which is awful because I believe just like grapes migrated around the world 500 years ago, and we got enriched by sugar cane, for instance, and many other plants that came to Mexico, mango, citrus. I mean, what would be Mexican food without citrus, right?
Yeah.
We sent out our treasures as well: tomato, potato, chili, tobacco, and within that the agave plant. So my dream these days, I want to go to India and make an agave spirit.
There's a guy doing it.
Amazing.
There's a guy doing it, you know?
I know. There's multiple, but I would like to go as a Mexican and have the experience of making. I mean, maybe it's a crazy idea. Many of my friends in Mexico, they believe that I'm almost a traitor on this idea. I think that's a totally ridiculous thing. It's not understanding how mezcal and tequila is not really from Mexico. It came from abroad. The distillation was brought from the Alembic, but also the famous ancestral mezcal, which is a made-up, terrible marketing concept because it's not based in any science. I'm sorry to some friends who they strongly want to believe distillation was a relevant thing before the Spaniards arrived, but that was something coming from the Philippines with these other techniques. So Mexico was the center of the world 500 years ago. All the goods were moved from Asia into Europe, passing through Mexico. So Mexico became the most multicultural, most influenced from plants arriving from
the Pacific and the Atlantic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was the central hub of the world, if you want. And that is very little recognized due to ignorance and arrogance and this nationalistic stupidity that many of my beloved tequileros and mezcaleros have. They not only do it at a national level, they do it at a regional level too. They think the Oaxaqueños are the only guys with the right because they wrote the first regulation of mezcal. That's crazy. I think mezcal should be done and should be called mezcal everywhere in the world. And then you have a denomination because mezcal is the right word for a ferment that comes from agave.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem with the DO, it strikes me, is that it doesn't cover the whole of Mexico for mezcal. If you're going to have a mezcal DO, surely it should cover all the states, including, most importantly, probably Jalisco, right? You know,
Absolutely.
you cannot make mezcal in Jalisco, which is it just seems totally counterintuitive to me because it's the most famous mezcal producing state, arguably.
Look, it's like thinking that cognac is not brandy.
Yeah.
That's crazy, man. Everybody knows they were so famous, just like tequila became famous. They erased the word brandy in the bottle and just stay with the word cognac. Well, tequila did exactly the same. So this, let's say, common sense suddenly can get lost like this. And we go around the world promoting our brands and wanting to make a big deal. And people spend hours talking about the definition of the regulation, which is bullshit, instead of really talking about the core of the products we are selling, the plant, the fermentation. But everybody is obsessed in classifying, characterizing, dividing, talking names of species and regions. It's okay, but they are got. That's just a lot of bunch of information. It's better to be more fluid and understand what are the principles, the core elements that brings distinctiveness to the entire category of agave spirits. And sometimes that's what I feel. We, instead of being educating, we are compartmentalizing the minds of people. And someone who wants to prove they know a lot, they give you just a bunch of facts that are irrelevant.
I guess just to push back gently on that, the argument for fair and clear regulation may be one that sounds a bit like, if I'm producing a mezcal in a, and again, this is a bit of a loose word, but very authentic way, using very authentic production practices, my product should be differentiated from someone who is using a more industrial process, because the end user needs to understand.
That is fair. I think that is fair. Look, in most part of the world, each brand, each product tell its own story, and you are able to do that. In Mexico, we always want like an institutionalized element to be set on. So I'm going to categorize you. And then you give power to those systems of classification, and that power becomes misused. And I think that's the story we are living with mezcal and tequila, where you have a lot of unfairness with agave distillates, where they want to tell stories, but then you have to comply with the story they are saying you should tell. That's not good. That's bad. I think at the end, people in the world has the right to do what they do, and you can be honest or dishonest. But that's, you build your reputation on your own basis. And this generation of communal brands, I mean, I understand the government, the industry wants to build a concept on tequila or on mezcal, and they invest on that. I understand it's a brand owned by the country. But your reputation is always the producer reputation, and let's not waste so much time in bringing authorities to establish what's right and what's wrong. I believe I'm a liberal in that sense. The same that I embrace South African agave spirits and Indian and anything that is well made with passion and creativity. I don't mind the color, the skin, the language should be celebrated.
Got it. We've touched already on wild agaves. You have pretty strong opinions about the harvesting of these.
Of course, I have to separate things. One thing is, there's a new daughter that was born in my family, and I'm from the Sierra in Oaxaca, and I want to, 15 years after, I want to celebrate her 15 years and like birthday,
yes.
And I make a big party, and I decide to make a batch of tobala with the plants that grows in the wild. That sounds like perfectly right to me, right? But what is wrong, in my opinion, is illegal, because just to be very clear, all mezcal production with wild agaves is illegal. In order to be legal, you have to go and address the area where you're going to extract this natural resource, bring biologists and specialists to quantify the populations of those agave, establish a quota, make the government to produce you the right of extraction, and then you have to register in an official form the agave you extracted out. But
this is even if it's growing on your land?
Yes, completely. I mean, I can tell you a little bit story about Nocheluna.
We'll get onto the Sotol in a minute.
But yeah, even if the land is private property, If it's communal land as well, of course, it's very complex, and that's the problem.
And what-
It's so complex that people just decided, let's not follow the rules. But every single bottle of wild agave out there is an illegal act. And I'm just saying illegal, not because, I mean, again, it's not the same thing to go to the field and produce a little bit of liters and
Yeah, for a family.
the problem
get
is
together.
we have created an industry with multinationals that are acquiring brands and expanding them geographically. So it's a matter of look, and there's repercussions. The populations of Tobala,
Yeah.
particularly in Oaxaca, has been diminished enormously. And who are the biggest diminishers of that? The bigger brands who exploit those varieties the most. It's just like, but no, listen, I asked to the producer, I'm not the producer, the local communities and naturally good people who goes to nature and they respect it. All that, bullshit story that was built for years around the mezcal production in a, by the way, very, I don't know, like nativistic kind of perspective, which as a Mexican I dislike enormously, was used to sell a lot of liters of different wild agaves without making responsibility behind that. Because I am not producing, I'm buying the product from someone. A lot of brands has been an intermediary between, and that has to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think rather sadly, this sort of demand for wild agaves has actually been built largely off the back of a consumer taste for something that feels inherently authentic, that feels like it's a taste of how agaves may have been harvested and processed and distilled in the past. Because of course, if you go back far enough, all agaves were wild. None were cultivated, and so the potential extinction of some of these species due to over harvesting and their long lifespan and low sexual reproductivity has been brought about by people who really do love agave spirits. They want to taste something that's super authentic, super Mexican, super traditional, and yet that behavior is potentially resulting in the extinction of the species.
That's right. That's right.
There's not much
I
else
don't
to
know
say.
the extinction, but diminishing of population.
Yeah.
So now we have to fix that to go the other way around.
Yeah.
No. So when I started in the business of mezcal since Montelobos, my commitment was I don't want to use any wild agave at all. I has to ensure it comes from a cultivated parcel, and it took quite a few years until I found the person Aron Alba, where we started with Montelobos in Puebla, with Cupriata and Tobala. And eventually we started to establish an agronomical company that takes care of the brands. I mean, Ojo de Tigre, Montelobos, Contraluz, the brands we have developed, and we grow the agave for projects. But yeah, I think that consciousness wasn't there. And let's not be too unfair also, because a lot of these brand owners were not people, biologists like I am, were like enthusiasts. And reality bias is easy when you get passionate about things.
Yeah.
And you are not an expert, then you build a narrative that will not get you into trouble. And it's not evilness, really.
No.
It's just, and also it's very overwhelming to what we do, how you do these things. It requires a lot of knowledge, a lot of effort, a lot of investment to build a solution to these things. It changed the status quo of things. So I cannot blame anybody. It's a multifactorial thing.
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at. And then it feels like there's a tension between small producers, especially in the remoter areas of states like Oaxaca, and then the larger, let's say, more commodified brands. Certainly some of the producers I've met, I think, feel like they need to take on a role as a protector of traditional agave spirits production. As some of these brands become multinational, they get bigger, and perhaps some of the production techniques also get optimized for efficiency, let's say.
Completely. Which is the right thing to do, by the way. Ojo de Tigre, for instance, we have a distillery in Puebla, close to Atlisco, where I have invented a lot of stuff. I have a machine that mix the tina. The thing that fucked up the bodies of the mezcaleros the most is mixing the fiber with the water. I mean, that generates all sort of back pains in a horrible way. We have a machine that you put the water and it turns it all around. And I have a perfectly traditional tina, but it was not turned around with the force of a person. Is that horrible? I don't think so. And look, we are what we are. This is something particular with the products I make. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. And people may like that or not. I'm not. I don't produce narratives that will just bring your imagination. I'm trying to make realistic approach to it.
Honestly, even if you don't, I think the thing is, if you're honest about what you're doing and someone doesn't like your product, it's fine. But at least you're honest about it, right? And not, by the way, I'm not saying that your products are dislikable.
Also, Tigre, we recycle 60% of water.
Yeah.
We take the mash after fermentation. After fermentation and distillation, we reutilize the water for the next ferment. So I use 60% less water. Hey, you modify the traditional, you should get rid of the water. You know what? Water is a very scarce resource. It's important to me. I'm making large quantities, yes, cultivated agave and everything. So I think that's not wrong. It's just what you are. But to the small producers, I respect highly that. I think traditional mezcal has to be defended, has to be protected, has to be better defined, because everybody is utilizing, even if they produce large amounts, those concepts. And I think a new regulation has to come out that is clear on tiny little producers versus large producers, and that has to be in a transparent way. But also we need to ask more for the small producers too. That's the other thing. We need to increase and share ways in which damage can be controlled, in which they bring inventories of how much they are extracting if they are using wild agave, so at least they have transparency of the amounts they are taking. And everybody should see what the others are producing, because it happens that those with better commercial capabilities can extract faster than those with less. So imagine how unfair. You live in a community where you have 5 mezcaleros, right? But there's one with a great contract with a big brand, and he's making Tobala. Well, this guy is extracting 5 times more than the other 4. When the other 4 wants to get access to the Tobala, there's no Tobala anymore. So why are not community regulations there? You know?
Yeah.
It's very informal, a lot of this.
It feels like in general, whether it's regulations or pressure to sort of culturally change things, all of this stuff needs to happen on a much smaller scale than it currently is. Like these big sweeping rules and regulations, and I guess the kind of interwarring between producers, large and small, everything needs to come down to more of a community, micro level.
Yeah, I agree. And then just final thing, because we're supposed to...
Yeah, we got to keep going. Yeah, we got half an hour left.
But just a final thing. There's a lot of speculation if monocultive in agave is a terrible or not terrible thing. Well, monocultive will always be worse than the possibility, which agave offers that, thankfully, to have a multi-system, which other things can be grown, because it's such a long time. However, no matter how you grow agave, in terms of, you can have choices that are environmentally much better than most other crops out there. Sugarcane. Sugarcane used to be very abundant in states like Puebla, certain areas of Jalisco, when there used to be water.
Michoacan with
Michoacan, yeah. One of the most polluting, by the way, crops, because if you want to talk about environmental issues around a crop, you have to think on sugarcane. It's horrendous. But the thing is, there's no more rain.
Soil destruction or water? Or what is
lack of water, like the weather change. So you go to Puebla, to areas that used to grow sugarcane, that are in the poorest circumstances right now. Many towns almost abandoned, just few women there. And you can reconvert enormous pieces of land that is just dust flying around in tiny little twisters, like nothing there, into agave fields, properly planted for organic agriculture. So the potential of growing 5 times more agave in Mexico and the amount of sugars we get, it's the most sustainable option we have. The idea that growing and increasing, the problem is when you destroy land. The problem is like in Jalisco with avocados or with agave, they go and get rid of the wild forest, of the natural space. That is horrendous, but there's enough arid, empty land that used to be used for crop that now is totally not utilized.
Yeah, I seem to remember reading, and you'll know whether this is correct or not, that obviously sugarcane is always touted as being an extremely efficient crop in terms of, amount of sugar produced per square meter. But I have a feeling agave is even more efficient.
But the water, you do have it's more efficient. Sugarcane is more efficient.
It is.
But you have to have an unlimited amount of water available.
Sure, got you.
While in agave, there's no water need. So the water footprint of agave is the lowest in the world.
So as soon as you add water in as a variable, then the agave wins. Yeah, that's your Sotol. Yeah. So let's move on because we don't have long left. You got a hard stop in about half an hour, and we've got more spirits to taste. So this is your Sotol. So talk me through this.
So this is a project I started with Ricardo Pico and Eduardo Arrieta a few years ago. 3 years ago. And what we wanted was to bet into bringing the category of Sotol into a much more visible place. The Sotol, all of it is wild. This comes from a private ranch. Every single...
And it's legal in Sotol?
No, it's not legal because it's not illegal to get wild things out of there. What is illegal is to do it without proper... permission and vigilance and accountability, which means you need to know. So the ranch is like 10,000 hectares. It's huge. It's very different reality, Chihuahua than Oaxaca. There is very few people with an enormous state the size of Spain, basically. That's Chihuahua. And where few people may manage a very large population. So in the case of Nocheluna, the ranches are audited. They measure the amount of Sotol there, and then they allow you to extract certain amount during a period of 5 years. Once you extract it, you have to go and register in the highway. You weight it and you report the extraction of that. So, but we are the first ones to put a program for domesticating Sotol, like seriously.
Okay, so to actually start farming it.
Exactly. It will take many years. I mean, the average age in this bottle is between 25 to 35 years, so 30 years.
Is it?
That's the age of the plants.
I didn't know they lived that long. Wow.
Yeah, and Sotol is a cousin of agave. It's in the Asparagaceae family.
But not an agave.
It's not an agave. It's very, very fatty. Again, similar strategies. The solutions are similar. Very high in terpenes, that's why it's so green, so green.
It's really, really green. Yeah.
And
herbal. Yeah.
And it feels very mineral too.
Yeah, yeah.
So
yeah, salty, minty, herbal, and then a little bit of smoke on there as well.
It feels very soft, but this is 43%. But it's soft. We didn't. I mean,
it's quite elegant.
It's typically 45 to 50 easily.
Yeah.
We wanted something that could represent the category. So it's our bet of building a category that doesn't exist. It's been very hard, although, I mean, at some point, Lenny Kravitz, who had offered to make a tequila, a vodka, a champagne, and said no hundreds of times because his quest was not to come and profit from something, but more to get involved into something he could respect and feel excited. He wanted to partner with Nocheluna, and we've been together in this adventure. But yeah, many times when you talk about celebrities, you would imagine it's all wrong. And I think depends very much how the association and the purpose of things are. Lenny helped us to bring some awareness in an inexistent category, so he will not profit from it. We'll build it with us. And it's truly because his personal love. You would say no to someone who suddenly fell in love with something. I mean, for us was like, you want to be part of this? We were very clear. This is not like tequila that you will be selling thousands of cases in 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But
and who knows in 10 or 20 years, right? I mean,
long term,
yeah,
maybe. Yeah. And here there's many goals. We are the NOM #1. We are the first brand that obtains the NOM. Again, that's not a big compliment.
How many noms are there in Sotol?
Maybe 3 at this point.
Okay.
And then you have all these small Sotoleros products. That, by the way, that I think the most prominent, beautiful project is my partner Pico selling it. Sotoleros is his brand, and it's really wonderful to see that going on. But for the small producers, it's almost impossible to comply with regulation. Coming back to this, these people, they don't own the land. They go just out there, get a few plants. It's an ocean of plants in Chihuahua, with all honesty. I mean, here we have the opposite situation. Still should be regulated because at some point that's going to get out of control. But yeah, another expression of what the desert and the plant adaptation can bring: fat, herbaceousness, sweetness. There you are.
And that's how you would differentiate Sotol, or at least this product, from other from agave spirits. Is this sort of minerality, the greenness? That's the sort of the flavor camp that
It's
it's
more,
in.
yeah, it has more flowery notes. I feel it's in a way, it's very intense. It feels less smoky. Like, it's so intense, the herbaceousness, the freshness of it, that it feels different than a mezcal. But it's in the family for sure.
Yeah. Okay, we've got some whiskey to try, but I think back here, I don't know if you noticed, we've got some of the Almave poured out. We didn't have the full bottle, but we've got sample. So, and also sort of sticking with the celebrity thing as well.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
So the credit has to be the other way around.
Okay.
I never imagined I would be doing a non-alc in my life. I promise you. Until this guy came to knock in the door through a relationship of Moises Guindy, my partner, saying, hey, Luis loves agave, loves tequila, but he doesn't drink by conviction, maybe once a year or once every 2 years, but
Don't drink and drive, right?
he's committed to that, and he's asking who in the world could make something out of agave that is real, that is not like a concoction of artificial flavors or whatever flavors. And do you want to try and challenge that? And this is what came out.
So just to be clear, what we've got here is a non-alc that is made from agave, and it's in partnership with Lewis Hamilton, the F1 driver.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So how do you go about making this?
So what I said is, well, I know it's a lot of flavor in agave, the green aspect, the cooked agave aspect. So basically, we started with cooked agave. We changed a little bit the ratio, more fiber than juice. And we make a multiple distillation process with water. So we basically make an hydrolate that's commonly made in the perfume industry. We put the water in the still and we repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, and the liquids start to get more charged with the flavors that you have there, both the milder reaction, sweetness, caramelic, and the green. And that base is 60% of the volume in the bottle was distilled at least 7 times in order to achieve that. And then once that the aromas are there, you have to rebuild flavor, because lots of the things that gives you flavor not necessarily gets distilled with water, and alcohol plays a very important role. So for the mouthfeel, organic acids, for example, so it has a little bit of organic acids here. Citric malic acid is here. In the case of amber, wood is an element. So we do high pressure water extraction in wood. So some wood is there. The color is a slightly bit of the caramel, like the cooked agave thing is given to bring the color and give a little bit of sweetness. And the other part that was a very challenging one was also in the mouthfeel, also the pungency. That's the most complicated element of alcohol. There's a bite in the alcohol that is unique. Here we cannot really replicate it identically, but we use capsaicin, which is this alkaloid in chilies.
Yeah,
makes you
the spicy bit of chili,
that gives you a little bit sting.
So there's a little bit of capsaicin in there.
Yeah, and finally is the stability, which we were really obsessive in not utilizing benzoate, sodium benzoate, and that bullshit. So we use a particular glycolipid from a fungi, which is really wonderfully stable. So it's a natural extract of these fungi who give us a stability. And the other thing we discovered is bloody agave is so fucking tough. This distillate that is incredibly stable. For launching this, we had to do microbe test challenges. So basically, you take your product and it gets purposely contaminated, and this thing is incredibly stable. I mean, still, I would say you use it, you close it, you try to keep it in the fridge. That's the best way to do it. But I have bottles that has been open for 6 months, and is still there without getting rotten. So that's it.
I mean,
What you will see, this is an agave distillate. The tequila is not really there because no fermentation happened.
no, but it does smell. It smells like a reposado or an añejo. It has the sort of, it's got some of the cask characteristics which you've managed to get from that wood extraction. So it has some sort of caramelly, slightly banana-y wood characteristics. But then I think it really is reminiscent of, opening the oven on the brick oven door, that roasted caramelly, slightly pineapple-y note that you get from cooking agave.
I mean, when we launched this, I sat with Louis and I was saying, man, you are in Formula One, right? In Formula One, cars change every year. They improve it. And in the world of spirits, you typically make something forever. You want a profile that will never change. Says, well, we are entering in a new world and on out, and this is going to be like racing cars. Almave is this version of Almave, but we're going to evolve into a second version.
Sure.
This is our ongoing research. And what is lacking here is the fermentative side.
Yeah.
And that is the thing I'm working really hard. So the next version of Almave will have the same agave, but with added components of the fermentative dimension. Again, it's very difficult to make these kind of things. There's bacteria, there's also new technologies appearing non-alc, but we are in early times. It's like when beer, you remember when beer started to make non-alc versions, it was so bad.
Yeah.
And now you could really drink wonderful stuff. So we wanted to bring this honest from the raw material, but I absolutely agree. And this is something it's a wonderful thing for making margaritas. Don't get me wrong. I mean, use it. It's fantastic product. It's nice sipping it. I mean, Luis loves this with a glass of ice and a little bit of orange. Like just sipping it it feels adult. It doesn't feel, I mean,
definitely feels adult, and there's spice there. You do get agave flavor from it. Like you say, I think there's some fermented characteristics that are missing, and it's so hard to replicate the effect of alcohol without alcohol. Just on the fermentation side, what's the plan for that? Are you planning on fermenting and as a byproduct producing alcohol and then removing it, or are you going to use?
So we are exploring different routes. One is using bacteria,
and then that won't produce alcohol, but it will produce some of the
exactly some complexities there.
Yeah.
Others is more in relationship of how to isolate from fermented must or from tequila itself aromas, but without the alcohol, which has its challenges as well. But that's the route we are going. But I think the product right now, when you try what is out there in the non-alc world, it's crazy good. And particularly in a cocktail. I know you're tasting it neat, but if you do a margarita with this, a paloma, it doesn't disappoint. You can bring a wonderful cocktail. And for me, it has been an opener. My career changed after this product. If I see myself now, I don't see myself only as a master distiller. My desire as a professional now is to try to change the shape of other kind of things like Coca-Cola, like soft drinks. I mean, and bring a natural approach and bring the true flavors of raw material into drinks that are making people ill and that are not coming from real raw material. So the professionals in the drink industry, they have bastardized a lot of stuff, and it's time to come back to raw material. So the first exercise for me is this non-alc, but I hope that as is possible, we may be bringing into the table like things that may not be related with alcohol anymore, but will be related with taste.
Exciting times. So we got about 10 minutes left.
And then it's what time?
Then it's 10:02, and you got to walk 5 minutes to go start a seminar somewhere.
Exactly.
Let's just finish up trying the whiskey. I think, and I'll pour some while I talk. I really do believe that Mexico has the potential to be the most exciting spirits producing country in the world.
I share that vision, man.
Yeah.
As you.
And that's because obviously, needless to say, there's the agave spirits, which is in itself maybe enough to warrant that claim because it's so diverse in its styles, in the culture around it and the production techniques. But then you throw in the fact that there are a great number of rum distilleries in Mexico producing some really interesting stuff. There's a history of rum with Charandra in Michoacan, and that has its own DO as well, I think, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you start to think, well, there's also vodka distilleries and gin distilleries and now whiskey distilleries as well. And so every single product that would normally sit within your speed rail behind a bar can and is being made in Mexico. And that is really quite unique because, well, partly because there's so few countries producing agave spirits that we have named a couple, South Africa and India. But really, I think Abasolo is one of the ones that's leading the charge for Mexican spirits. And rightly so, being made from corn, right? Which, of course,
Particular corn.
Particular corn, but because corn is indigenous to Mexico.
It is, yes. That's the argument to let's say, to create Mexican whiskey. But it's very important. Pre-Hispanic people didn't know how to break down the starches into sugars. The Peruvians did. They discovered that high altitude corn has a high diastatic capacity.
Oh, it has the enzymes to do it, does it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that you have chicha there,
yes.
and chicha de jora, and you can drink it and get drunk with it. But what they do is they allow the grains to start sprouting. And the corn I use is very similar.
And that doesn't happen at low altitude.
High altitude. It's the choclo from Peru, very big grains. I use the equivalent in Mexico. All the corn in Abasolo is 2,000 meters and above.
And is it all malted corn then?
No. One fraction is malted.
Yeah.
The other one is nixtamalized, which is also something we introduced. Never done before, but I do alkali cooking. Then dry and then roasted.
And this is the same process with lime, is it? That's used to make tortilla flour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we blend both the malting, a fraction.
Yep.
The other one is nixtamalized, dried, and roasted. We make a flour, we blend them together, and with that we do our mash.
Your mash,
sweet mash.
Yeah.
High gravity, which means this is 25 bricks, very high sugar.
Wow.
And what I create is something that can distill to 40% in the low wine, in a simple state.
Really?
Which I forgot to bring. I brought some of the low wine.
Yeah.
40% low wine is beautiful. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have even to cut it.
You didn't decide just to bottle that. You could just bottle that, right?
I could, and that's a big fight internally because many people say there will not be a market. I have a company now, and I don't care. I think we should bottle it and see who will buy it. But the low wine is amazing. Single distill Mexican corn spirit. That's what.
But you could do it as another line extension.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's kind of the idea. Yeah. So anyway, this is the Abasolo, and then it's aged in new toasted barrels and ex-bourbon barrels, and I blend the two. Purposely, I already have barrels that are 7 years old. Actually, there's a new SKU that may come later that is deeper in wood, but I didn't want that for the core essence of Abasolo. Abasolo is about the corn. It's not about wood. There's so much wonderful whiskey about wood. This is really like black tea. You have also this element like clove. You have the very intense corn elements there. But it's a different experience. I remember Dave Broom interviewed me at some point, and I'm very excited to say that he included Abasolo in the new book he just released. But and he was excited, saying, "Man, you are truly bringing a profile that doesn't exist."
Yeah.
Because if you think on Japanese whiskey, it's some sort of an interpretation of Irish and Scottish whiskey. Yeah. If you look, you have North American, Irish, and Scottish. And then the rest of the world is copying that with their local thing, maybe using barrels with wine here and there. But this is truly a differentiated flavor of whiskey. Yeah. This is another thing.
Well, this is the thing, and I think you have a great opportunity, and any other producers in Mexico, to start establishing a Mexican whiskey style. And the nixtamalized, I always screw that up saying it, but that was my best effort. Nixtamalized, is that right? Nixtamalized? Yeah. That in and of itself is a fascinating component, and obviously it's sympathetic to the food culture of Mexico and these traditional sort of processing of corn flour. You're right, bang on, like this sort of dry black tea, clove, and then on top of that, a little bit of the cask character. There's sort of sweet shop, banana-y kind of notes there as well. So it's got a little tropical vibe to it as well, an equatorial vibe even. Like, it's really good, really, really tasty, and definitely distinguishable from bourbon whiskey, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. It's young whiskey, 3 years old, this one. And I didn't want to go further because then corn starts to get weaker against the wood. The wood is such a powerful.
Yeah.
So, but we will get some, we have some, now we are playing with red wine from Mexico and mezcal barrels, and there will be other things.
Oh, that was the other one I missed. You got wine and you can do brandy as well, right? So this is it's really everything there.
But yeah, Casa Lumbre is what you explained.
Yeah.
Our purpose in Casa Lumbre was how to bring the Mexican biological, cultural, and sensorial patrimony of Mexico into spirits. And that's been the goal of the last 12 years of work on my side. I think I try to do the best representation in every brand and product I make. Each brand is its own world. Some are more the capricious, like this one is a very capricious kind of proposition. This I spent 5 years into bringing Abasolo into the world in the way I like it. And not everybody likes it. I mean, it's not the most popular product in the portfolio, which is fine, because I think there's a balance also. We are truly bringing that flavor of corn. And anyway, I think you can make delicious cocktails. The Mexican food scene is growing. I need a whiskey, and Abasolo is a good option. And Nixta is just the exercise of sub-ingredients in the distillery. It's a sweet mash filtered. Is the spirit I was talking, the low wine blended to it. And then I do a maceration of tender corn and I add it to it. I put a little bit of extra sugar. Even though the sweet mash gives sugar, I need extra. I use piloncillo.
Yes.
And that's Nixta.
So you end up with this corn liqueur, yeah.
But it's truly a nice corn experience.
And the packaging is just one of the best.
I have to say, my partner, Danish Nevis, is one of the best bottle designers in the world. I mean, I have to, and it's internal. We are 3 founders. I do the liquid, the other guy do the packaging, and Moy is the businessman.
It's such a joy to hold it. You know. Well, look, we've run out of time basically because you're about to go off and give a seminar that starts in 10 minutes.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So let's finish up. Ivan, like, what a pleasure. I feel like we've covered a lot, and yet there's so much more we could talk about, which means I'm going to have to force you to do another interview.
Next time, maybe if there's subjects you want to discuss, we can make a list of things so I come and we discuss.
I mean, look, this was, for the benefit of anyone listening, this was pulled together in the last 5 hours. This morning, basically, through voice notes, that we actually managed to arrange this. I'm so glad we did, and that we've met and we've got to chat about through all this stuff and to tap your incredible brain. But like I say, I think there's so much more that we can talk about, and I look forward to doing it in the future. But thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity. Salud.